Hello and welcome to a special edition of Sprite Castle. For those of you that normally watch my show, you know Sprite Castle is a program in which I play, discuss, and review Commodore 64 games. This is available on YouTube as a video. It's also available as a podcast, an audio recording. And I have a lot of people that watch my shows and listen to my podcast who enjoy retro computers. They enjoy the Commodore 64. And you can bet that anytime something pops up about the Commodore 64, they are quick to email that information to me. And so over the past 24 hours, I've had probably a dozen people contact me and say, hey, have you seen that new Commodore 64 video by the Angry Video Game Nerd? Well, it turns out I have. So I watched the video earlier this morning, and I've been watching the Angry Video Game Nerd for many years. I'm a fan of his. I think his videos are very funny, and I get the whole character. I get the shtick, and yes, I enjoy the videos. But I will say there are some things in his latest video about the Commodore 64 that I didn't agree with. I think that he got some facts wrong, and I think he probably didn't show the machine in its best light for comedic value, which I get. But if you want to know a little bit more about the C64, if you want to have a couple of those things explained and a couple of the facts corrected, then that's what I'm going to be doing on this special episode of Sprite Castle. If you enjoy the Commodore 64 and you want to watch other games and hear reviews about games and watch gameplay, things like that, my YouTube channels are right there, Sprite Castle, and I have playlists on Amigo's Retro Gaming. I do stream Commodore 64 games, so if you want to see some of these games and interact with me and talk about old games, there's my Twitch channel, and then all my podcast information is available at podcast.robohara.com. I do have a Patreon that supports my shows, but I'm not really here to push Patreon. That's real. Actually, it's just a default slide in my slide deck. But what I'm here to do is talk about this new video from the Angry Video Game Nerd. Now, this video, he begins by talking about the Commodore 64, and I will tell you this. It's obvious to me that he is familiar with the Commodore 64. You can see him pull it out of the box. He hooks it up. He knows where the cables go. I mean, it's not fumbling around with stuff, and that's not really a point in his video. But as he begins to talk about the games, one of the first things that he says is that games for the Commodore 64 were available in all different formats. He mentions cartridges, he mentions cassettes, and then he mentions floppy disks. And he specifically says not only are they available in 5 1/4 inch floppy, but also 3 1/2 inch versions. Well, that's not really true. I looked up a thread on Lemon 64, which is probably the largest Commodore 64 forum on the internet. And a group of people were trying to come up with a list of games that were actually released on 3 1/2 inch floppies, and they came up with 3. And one of those games is called Metal Dust, which came out in 2005. So there were not very many games released at all on 3 1/2 inch disc format. Now, there was a 3 1/2 inch disc drive. It's the Commodore 1581. That's right there on the shelf back there. And they were great for downloading games off of BBSs and putting a lot of files all in one place. And they were good for some utilities, but traditionally off the shelf, there weren't games available as 3 1/2 inch floppy disks. He also talks a little bit about the number of titles for the Commodore 64, and this can always be argued, but the number he throws out is 2,000 games and 10,000 titles. I think that's way low. If you look at Game-Based 64, I think they have the number at around 25 to 27,000 titles. So it's a lot higher than the number he's given. And the way that you count those games is also affects the number. If you're just talking about games off the shelf versus homebrew games, demos, things like that pad those numbers. But his number of 2,000 is definitely low. As he continues to talk about games and floppy disk drives, he said the floppy disk drives weren't perfect, which I will give you that. And he says that one of the problems with the disk drives was that sometimes disks would get stuck in there and would have to be pried out with a butter knife. I have been using Commodore floppy drives since 1985. I still have those same drives that I had when I was a kid. I have 1541 drives in the box still up there. I don't think I've ever had to pry a floppy disk out with a butter knife. Now, occasionally what would happen is one of the labels that you applied to a disk might start peeling off, and I've had labels get discs stuck in there, and especially the little write protect labels that you would put over the notches on the side so that you couldn't accidentally erase something on a disk. But I've never had discs just randomly get stuck in a drive that needed to be pried out. Let's put it this way. Angry Video Game Nerd, if you are having this problem, I would love for you to send me that drive, and I will fix that for you because that should not be happening. It struck me as odd when he said, when he's talking about the Commodore 64, and it's more the way he said it, I think, but he says, it even had a printer. Well, yes, old computers had printers. Printers are not a new thing. In fact, printers predate monitors. In the old days, you would have a computer and it would just print out data. There was no monitor. So my first computer was a TRS-80 Model 3 that came with a printer. I've never seen a home computer that did not have some sort of printer available. TI-99, Commodores, Apples, basically any computer you can imagine. So I'm not sure why he was shocked by this. I buy and sell. I buy and sell, except for I don't really sell. I mostly buy Commodore 64 hardware. This is a pile of printers that I had for a while in my garage that I couldn't get rid of. I couldn't give these away. That's a MPS 801, a 803, and an 805. And I did finally offload them. But so Commodore printers aren't really rare. In fact, they're worthless for the most part. I will say that he did share a story in his video about printing banners with Print Shop, and that definitely made me smile because I think most people that had a computer and a printer back then definitely printed signs for their door or birthday cards or banners like that. So I did get a kick out of that. The next thing he talks about is a little bit, he touches on copy protection. And specifically, he talks about code wheels. And code wheels, if you're not familiar, were these disks that you would spin multiple layers sometimes. And to get things to line up, there would be a cut out section. And the game would ask you to type in the information in that so that you could continue. So this prevented you from making a copy of the game and giving it to your friend, because without the code wheel, they couldn't get the game to start. The thing that I didn't agree with was that he said that this was the most common type of copy protection on the Commodore 64. I don't think it was anywhere near that. I looked on Moby Games. I did a little bit of research, and for the Commodore 64, looking through the categories of games with code wheels, games with extra content, and games with information in the manual, I came up with about 70 titles, which would be far less than 1%, far less than 1%. It would be, less than 0.1%. It would be, less than that. So this was not the most common form of copy protection. It was a type of copy protection that kind of came and went because it was expensive for these companies to print these code wheels and attach a brad or to do special printing on colored paper and things like that. They didn't really want to do that. So this definitely was a type of copy protection, but it was pretty far, very far from being the dominant form of copy protection. He also mentions viruses, and he says, there were viruses at this point in time. If you want to go on a technicality, yes, there were viruses. If you Google Commodore 64 viruses, mostly you'll find one, which was kind of a proof of concept. Viruses were not like what they were later, like on PCs in the early PC days. I've never personally seen a Commodore 64 virus, and I really went to the worst places on BBSs and the worst places on the web and have downloaded literally tens of thousands of titles, and I've never encountered a virus. So I mean, on a technicality, I guess you could say there were viruses or there was a virus, but it's certainly not the connotation that we think of today. We're like, oh, you could have downloaded something and got a virus. It just didn't happen. It didn't happen back then. The next part of his program, he talks about the slow loading of Commodore 64 games. And man, I can't disagree with that. Commodore 64 was known for super slow loading times, and he kind of combines this with the complexity of loading. You can see, to load the first file, if you've ever used a Commodore 64, that top command, load dollars, or load asterisk, comma 8, comma 1. If you wanted to load a directory, it was load $, comma 8, right? But to kill both of those birds with one stone, almost everyone that had a Commodore 64 longer than a month or two ended up with one of these. This is a Epix fast load cartridge, which defeats both of the things that he complains about in the video. Number one, by plugging this into your Commodore 64, you increased your loading time over 700%, 7 times faster. And literally just plug it in. There's nothing to install. The other thing it did was it replaced all those complicated commands with simple commands. So to get a directory, instead of load $, comma 8, and then list and all that, you just hit $ and enter. If you wanted to load a program, you just put the % key and, the name of the game, or % asterisk enter. So, I mean, this one thing, which was about $30, bypassed all the things that he's complaining about. Now, most of us ended up buying one of these fast load cartridges. This is actually the original box of the one that I had when I was a kid. So I got a fast load cartridge, and then my friends were like, man, I wish I had one of those. And then I gave my friend mine because I bought a CinemaWare Warp Speed, which was supposed to be even faster. And so as people bought newer versions of fast loading cartridges, they would give the other ones away to their other friends. I ended up replacing that with a final cartridge, which had even more features. It has buttons on the top and all kinds of things it could do. And I replaced my final cartridge with a Super Snapshot. So there were tons and tons of these fast loading type cartridges that did other things as well. The Ice Pick cartridge, which is infamous, did not speed up loading. We'll talk about the Ice Pick cartridge someday. But my point is that there were a lot of ways to speed up loading. And then people ended up buying Jiffy DOS and these other things like that were chip replacements that would speed up your loading even faster than that. So yes, if you bought a Commodore 64 off the shelf, you came home, hooked it up, it was slow. But there were very inexpensive and very common ways to speed that up. After the game loads, he goes into a bit, and it's very funny, about how games are sometimes hard to load. He shows a video where he says, I pressed every button on the keyboard and I couldn't get it to load. Well, first of all, pressing every button on the keyboard is a waste of time because no game was ever started by hitting, Shift 3 or an arrow key. All games start with one of 5 or 6 buttons. Usually the space bar gets you in past the opening. You have the 4 function keys on the side, which you can see in his picture, that would do things, or enter. But usually it was the button on one of the 2 joysticks. To prove his point, he says, I loaded this game and I couldn't get past this screen. But if you look at the screen he's showing here, this is a crack intro to a game. This is so someone has stripped the copy protection off this game, and I'm not dogging him for that. This is the way most of us got our games back in the day, and all of us get our games now. Nobody's buying games, Commodore games at the store. But when he says, well, gosh, these don't always start the same way. I mean, this is a cracked game. First of all, crackers and these guys and importers and all that, there were no rules they had to follow. They could do whatever they want. Now, again, 99.9% of games would go past the screen if you hit the space bar. But, you may run into one that doesn't, but it would be pretty rare. But complaining that the system isn't always the same. This is like buying a car that has been hot wired and stolen and then coming home and complaining that it doesn't start with just a normal key. Well, of course not. It has been modified for a different purpose. So not all games do that. He also, to make his point, he says that he even bought one of these Commodore 64 minis, which I also have sitting right back. I think it's on the shelf and the box is somewhere up there. And he says a lot of games require you to hit run stop, and there's no run stop key. And he says, I've even plugged in a USB keyboard, but I have to use this other method because there's no run stop key. Well, a few things on that. Number one, I don't know of any game in the world that you start with the run stop key. Now, I do know that there are some cracks that you have to hit different things to get past or whatever. I don't think it's usually the run stop. Maybe it is. But I also have one of those C64 minis, and it comes with documentation. And you can see right here, if you plug in a USB keyboard, if you hit escape on that keyboard, that's the same as run stop. So, I get it. It's a shtick. He wants to be angry about it, but literally what he's being angry about is that he didn't read the directions because the directions show you very clearly right there what key is the run stop key. Next, he starts going through and showing some really terrible type games. And so I just kind of wanted to offer you some quick alternatives. One, he shows Street Fighter 2 and says, look how terrible this game is. This game looks terrible. Well, this game does look terrible. I'm not disagreeing with that. But what he doesn't show you is International Karate, for example, which is listed as one of the best fighting games on the system. And not only that, as you can see right here, 3 people are playing. You could play against your friend and the computer would be a third person. So everybody was fighting everybody. It's a great game, and obviously it looks a lot better than the one he showed. Another game that he plays is He-Man Jr., and he talks about what a terrible game this is and points out this opening graphic of being terrible. Well, first of all, this opening graphic is terrible. It is an inside joke for Commodore 64 users. Everybody has seen and passed around this picture. It is one of the worst pictures. But what you have to know about the game he's showing you, which he does not mention, which is called He-Man Jr., is that it is not a game that was sold in stores. It was a game that was made with a game system called Shoot 'em Up Construction Kit. So this is kind of like saying that Legos are dumb because somebody built something ugly with Legos. The logic really doesn't follow here. So he talks about how terrible this game is, but this game is literally something that someone made in their basement and uploaded and got passed around and has ended up on the internet, and now he's playing it and presenting it as a commercial title, which it wasn't. But anyway, back to this graphic. This opening thing, again, has been known as a joke, and it's referred to because of the game. It is called He-Man Jr. Somebody modified this at one point and made He-Man Senior. So this is a long-running joke in the Commodore 64 community that a lot of people know about. Then he shows how terrible this game is. But what he doesn't show is this version of a He-Man game. This is the game Barbarian that someone has modified and replaced all the characters with He-Man characters. And it looks fantastic. So definitely there are better looking things than the examples that he has chosen to show. This is, again, if you're familiar with the game Barbarian, someone has modified it into looking like Castle Grayskull is in the background there. Much more attractive than the version that he used. And again, he kind of points out that, what kind of graphics are this on the Commodore 64? This is an example of graphics on the Commodore 64. So I wouldn't judge what this computer can do based on that picture of He-Man. There's a lot better examples out there of what the Commodore 64 is available of graphically. Another game that he shows off is this game, which is called Mario's Brewery. And he talks about how it's a terrible version of Donkey Kong. And you can see down there, it says copyright 1983, Jeremy Thorne. some kid named Jeremy made this game, Mario's Brewery, and he talks about how it's a really ugly version of Donkey Kong. I will get you that. Instead, this is a version of Donkey Kong available on the Commodore 64 that came out several years ago. It looks and plays and sounds a lot like the arcade version. So this is a much better, again, I'm going to flip back just so you can see this. This is the one that he shows as an example of a Commodore 64 game. But in reality, this is what's available on the Commodore 64. And by the way, when this game starts, it opens with this title screen while playing the theme from Donkey Kong Country. It's a really fun intro to the game, and all the picture fades up and stuff like that. So this is more in tune of what's available on the Commodore 64. Next, he talks about a game. He said he wanted to play Terminator, and he feels like he got duped because he loaded a game called Terminator, and he got this instead of Terminator. Well, that happens. There were a lot of games got renamed over time. People would rename it to make it seem like it was attached to a movie when it really wasn't, or something like that. So I don't know if this game was really released as called Terminator officially, but someone has renamed it Terminator, great, whatever. And then he moves on and says, well, what he really wanted to do is play Terminator 2, and he shows this screen, and then the game locks up, and he throws a fit, and he's like, I'm the angry video game nerd. I couldn't even get this game to work, and this is how a lot of the games go. Half the games don't even work. Not my experience. And in fact, what I did was I went to the Commodore Scene database, which is CSDB. You could Google that. I downloaded a copy of Terminator 2 Judgment Day and fired it right up in an emulator. And you can see right here, fires right up. Began playing, wasn't exactly sure what I was doing because I didn't read the instructions. But I didn't have any problem getting this game to work. So, maybe, I don't know if he has old floppies that are damaged. I don't know if he's downloaded stuff that are corrupt. But not only are games available, but a lot of times if you go to these places, there'll be 10 versions of the game available. So if one doesn't work, you can always get the second one or maybe the third one. I don't think I've ever had it where I had to download something more than twice. But I haven't found this experience. He kind of sells it as this quirky machine where a lot of things just don't work. And again, that's hasn't been my experience. You can see right here, I was able to get it to work, no problem. And finally, obviously, I've used the same picture. He goes into a bit about playing some other games, and he shows some different games on the Commodore 64. He shows Things on a Spring. He shows sex games. He shows Lazy Jones. These are all older, quirky type games. But if you look over here, this is a list on Lemon 64, and if you type the phrase Top 100 Commodore 64 Games, this is the list that will come up. And as we look down the list here, and you can see we've got Zack McCracken, Pirates, Maniac Mansion, International Karate, Bubble Bobble, Turrican, Last Ninja, Ultimate 4, Archon, Turrican, Wasteland, Space Rogue, Defender of the Crown, Elite. I'm not going to read all 100 to you, but there's a common theme here. Save for one, he does mention Great Guiana Sisters in his review, but other than that, he doesn't show or play any of the top 100 rated games on the Commodore 64. And so I think really that kind of shows me what the point of the video is. Again, and there goes Great Guiana Sisters there. I know that his videos are for entertainment and for him to, do this character where he gets angry about things. And obviously you're going to get angry if the games are terrible, right? But my point is that there are a lot of great games for the Commodore 64. Again, you can see some of the games scrolling by over here and notice that none of these are games that are mentioned in his video. But a lot of these games are mentioned on my podcast, Sprite Castle. So I don't want to... again, turn this. I'm scrolling down here towards the end, and we could see Realm of Impossibility, great game. Head Over Heels, great game. The Sentinel Barbarian, there's the one that we played. So I think my point would be is that there are a ton of great games available out there for the Commodore 64. And I don't think that's what he showed on his videos. So again, I will use this as a plug for a minute. If you want to see what some of those better games are, go to podcast.robohara.com and check out my podcast Sprite Castle and look through those list of games, and you will see a lot of great and fun games for the Commodore 64. One of my favorites is Friday the 13th, which I suspect the Angry Video Game Nerd may be talking about on his upcoming Halloween edition of Commodore 64 games. So anyway, thanks for checking this out. I do enjoy AVGN. I will continue to watch him. I think he's hilarious. But if you want to find out more about real Commodore stuff, I think there's probably some better resources out there for you. So thanks for watching this, and I look forward to hopefully seeing more of you and more of the Angry Video Game Nerd. Thanks, everyone.